Dr. Gina Park adjusted her lab coat nervously as she stepped into the Kepler Station tactical range. The metallic smell of weapon discharge and recycled air hit her immediately. She had spent the last 3 years studying alien microorganisms in sterile laboratories, not preparing for combat scenarios with Han Space Marines. "Move it, Doc." Sergeant Minho Kim barked from behind her. "We don't have all day for your field trip." The tactical range stretched before them like a metallic canyon. Holographic targets flickered at various distances, some stationary, others moving in unpredictable patterns. The sound of pulse rifles echoed through the chamber as other training squads practiced there. Marksmanship, blue energy bolts streaked through the air, finding their marks with mechanical precision. Gina clutched the standard-issue pulse rifle awkwardly. The weapon felt foreign in her hands, its weight distribution completely different from the delicate instruments she was used to handling. Her fingers fumbled with the power settings as she tried to remember the brief orientation she had received just an hour earlier. First time holding something bigger than a test tube. Private Dong-Yun Choice nodded, causing ripples of laughter among the other Marines. His own rifle seemed like a natural extension of his body, held with the casual confidence of someone who had been born for war. Sergeant Kim positioned himself behind Gina, his weathered face showing clear irritation. "Look, Doc, this isn't optional. Command wants all research personnel to have basic combat training before we reach the Outer Rim. There are things out there that don't care about your fancy degrees." Gina nodded, trying to block out the snickers from the other Marines. She raised the rifle, attempting to mirror the stance she had seen in the training videos. Her left foot was too far forward, her shoulders hunched defensively, and her grip on the weapon was tentative at best. "Steady now," Kim said, his voice carrying the forced patience of someone explaining something obvious. "Line up the sight, breathe out slowly, and squeeze the trigger. Even a child could do this." The first shot erupted from her rifle with a sharp crack of displaced air. The blue energy bolt flew wide, missing not just the target, but the entire target zone. It struck the range wall with a harmless flash, leaving a small scorch mark 10 feet to the right of where she had been aiming. "Outstanding," muttered Private Hyungwoo Nam. She managed to miss the whole universe. Gina's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she adjusted her grip and tried again. This time, she overcorrected, pulling the rifle too far to the left while simultaneously jerking the trigger instead of squeezing it smoothly. The weapon's safety systems, designed to prevent accidental discharge from improper handling, triggered a minor malfunction. Acrid smoke poured from the rifle's cooling vents, filling the immediate area with a chemical haze that made everyone cough and step back. Emergency lights flickered on the weapon's display, indicating a force shutdown protocol. "Perfect," Kim said, waving the smoke away from his face. "In 30 seconds. You've managed to completely disable a military-grade weapon. That's got to be some kind of record." The laughter from the other training lanes was no longer subtle. Marines from different squads had stopped their own exercises to watch the spectacle. Gina could hear whispered comments about lab rats and dead weight floating through the smoky air. Maybe Dr. Park should stick to looking at germs under a microscope, suggested Private Jae-hoon Lim. "At least those can't shoot back." Kim activated the rifle's emergency reset sequence, clearing the malfunction with practiced efficiency. "Tell you what, Doc, why don't you just observe for the rest of the session? Take notes or whatever it is you science types do. Leave the actual shooting to people who know which end of the rifle the dangerous stuff comes out of." Gina wanted to protest, to demand another chance, but the words stuck in her throat. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, measuring her failure, cataloging her incompetence. The weight of their judgment pressed down on her shoulders like the gravity of a heavy world. She stepped back from the firing line, her face burning with shame. The other Marines returned to their drills with renewed enthusiasm, their confidence boosted by witnessing someone even worse than their worst day. The sound of accurate shots filled the range again, each successful hit a reminder of her own inadequacy. Kim positioned himself at the firing line and demonstrated the proper technique with fluid precision. His shots found their targets with mechanical consistency, each blue bolt striking exactly where intended. "This is how it's done," he called over his shoulder. "Steady, controlled, professional." Gina stood in the observation area, her disabled rifle hanging uselessly at her side. She watched the Marines move through their combat scenarios with grace and skill, their weapons becoming extensions of their will. Every shot they fired was a small victory. Every target they hit was proof of their competence. She had never felt more out of place in her entire life. While the Marines continued their target practice, Gina found herself drawn to the tactical display screens mounted along the observation wall. The embarrassment of her failed shooting attempt still stung, but her scientific mind couldn't help analyzing the data streaming across the monitors. These screens normally showed routine information about ship movements, patrol routes, and defensive positions round Kepler Station. Something was wrong. The energy signatures scrolling past didn't match anything in the standard databases. Gina leaned closer, her xenobiology training kicking in as she studied the patterns. These weren't random cosmic phenomena or friendly ship signatures. They moved with purpose, following deliberate paths that reminded her of hunting behaviors she had observed in predatory microorganisms. "What are you staring at?" "Doc." Private Dongyan Choi appeared beside her, rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "Finally found something you can hit with your eyes." Gina ignored the jab and pointed at the display. "These energy readings. They're appearing in systematic sweeps round our outer defense perimeter. Look at the timing." Intervals. Choi squinted at the screen, clearly not understanding what he was seeing. "Looks like space junk to me, or maybe solar flares. You science people always think everything's more complicated than it is." But Gina's excitement was building. Her fingers flew across the display controls, pulling up historical data from the past several weeks. The patterns became clearer with each layer of information she added. These signatures weren't random at all. They followed precise geometric patterns, creating overlapping search grids that covered every approach to human settlements in this sector. "Sergeant Kim," she called out, her voice cutting through the rifle fire. "You need to see this." Kim finished his current drill before walking over, his expression already showing irritation. "What now?" "Doc, found some alien bacteria that's going to end the universe." Gina pulled up a three-dimensional holographic display showing the energy signatures plotted against known human positions. "These aren't natural phenomena. Someone is conducting systematic reconnaissance of our defensive capabilities. Look at how they avoid our patrol routes while maintaining perfect observation angles." Kim glanced at the display for exactly 3 seconds before turning away. Paranoid civilians seeing ghosts in sensor static. This is exactly why researchers shouldn't be allowed on military installations. You people turn every space anomaly into an invasion fleet. But the patterns are coincidence. Kim cut her off. "Focus on not shooting yourself in the foot during the next drill. Leave the tactical analysis to people who actually know what they're doing." The other Marines had overheard the exchange and were grinning among themselves. Private Hyunwoo Nam made exaggerated spooky gestures with his hands. "Oh, mysterious alien scouts. Better hide under our bucks." Gina felt her cheeks burn again. But this time it wasn't just embarrassment. It was frustration. She knew what she was seeing, even if nobody else would listen. Her years of studying predatory behavior patterns in alien microorganisms had taught her to recognize hunting strategies across different scales and species. The rest of the training session dragged on painfully. Gina stood in the observation area, pretending to watch the Marines practice while her mind raced through possibilities. The energy signatures were too organized to be natural, too precise to be accidental, and too widespread to be isolated incidents. When the session finally ended, the Marines filed out in groups, their conversation filled with jokes about trigger-happy researchers and imaginary threats. Kim was the last to leave, pausing just long enough to give Gina a warning look. "Don't go spreading panic among the civilian population, Doc. We have enough real problems without adding paranoid fantasies to the mix." Alone in the empty range, Gina made her decision. If the military wouldn't take her seriously, she would have to investigate on her own. She had security clearance for the station's research facilities, and that included access to the full sensor array network. That night, while most of the station slept, Gina made her way through the quiet corridors to the sensor control room. The soft hum of electronics and the gentle vibration of the station's rotation were the only sounds accompanying her footsteps. She used her research credentials to access the main computer system, diving deep into archived sensor data that went back months. What she found made her blood run cold. The energy signatures hadn't just been appearing for weeks. They had been building in frequency and intensity for almost 3 months. The pattern started with single, brief contacts near the outer rim of human space. Gradually, the signatures became more numerous, more coordinated, and more detailed in their scanning patterns. Someone was definitely studying human defensive positions, ship movements, and tactical responses. The reconnaissance was so thorough that whoever was conducting it now had detailed maps of every human installation within 100 light-years of Kepler Station. Gina cross-referenced the signatures with known alien species in the database. Nothing matched. These energy patterns were completely unknown, suggesting either a new species or existing aliens using technology they had never encountered before. Most disturbing of all was the recent change in behavior. The signatures were no longer content. With distant observation, they were moving closer, probing deeper into human space, testing response times and defensive capabilities. Gina sat back in her chair, staring at the data scrolling across multiple screens. Her hands trembled slightly as the implication sank in. This wasn't random exploration or scientific curiosity. This was intelligence gathering on a massive scale. The kind of systematic preparation that preceded military action. Someone was preparing to attack humanity, and nobody would believe her. The emergency alarm shrieked through Kepler Station at 05 for 7 hours, jolting Gina awake from her restless sleep. She had been dreaming about the energy signatures, watching them dance across holographic displays in an endless loop of approaching doom. Now those nightmares were becoming reality. Red warning lights paved the corridors in bloody illumination as she stumbled from her quarters. The station's automated voice echoed through the halls. Hull breach detected. Unknown vessels approaching. All personnel report to emergency stations. Gina rushed toward the command center, her heart pounding against her ribs. Through the observation windows, she could see them sleek, organic-looking ships that seemed to flow through space like living creatures. They moved in perfect formation, their hulls shimmering with an oily rainbow effect that made them difficult to focus on. The most terrifying part was how they simply passed through the station's defensive shields as if they didn't exist. The energy barriers that should have stopped any hostile approach flickered uselessly round the alien vessels like soap bubbles round thrown stones. How are they doing that? Someone shouted over the alarm klaxons. Gina pressed her face against the window, watching in horrified fascination as the alien ships extended what looked like metallic tentacles toward the station's edge. All Where they touched, the reinforced metal began to dissolve, creating perfectly circular entry points. The first explosion came from the direction of the tactical range. A section of the station that had been filled with Marines just hours before disappeared in a ball of superheated plasma. The aliens weren't just attacking randomly, they were surgically removing humanity's military capabilities. They're targeting our weapons training facilities first, Gina whispered, her scientific mind still analyzing even as terror gripped her throat. The corridor round her erupted into chaos as station personnel ran in every direction. Some headed for escape pods, others toward emergency stations. Many simply fled without any clear destination. The organized discipline of military life crumbled in minutes as the unknown became reality. Gina found herself swept along with a group of surviving Marines from the morning's training session. Sergeant Kim was there, his face grim as he led them through maintenance corridors away from the main attack points. "Stay low, move fast, and keep quiet," he ordered. His earlier dismissive attitude toward Gina completely forgotten in the face of genuine crisis. They had barely made it 3 corridors when the first creature appeared. It moved like liquid mercury given form and purpose. The being stood roughly human height, but possessed an impossible grace that suggested it could flow through spaces no solid creature should fit. Its body seemed to be part organic tissue and part advanced machinery, with cables and tubes weaving through what might have been flesh or might have been sophisticated synthetic materials. The creature's head turned toward them with mechanical precision, but its movements were pure predator. It had been hunting them, following their scent or heat signature or some other trace they couldn't hide. Private Dongyan Choi raised his rifle and fired 3 quick shots. The blue energy bolts struck the creature center mass, but instead of falling, it simply absorbed the impact and continued forward. The shots that should have been fatal barely slowed its advance. Impossible, Choi breathed, firing again with the same useless result. The creature moved like striking lightning. One moment it was 10 meters away. The next it had closed the distance and wrapped metallic tendrils round Choi's throat. The Marine's scream cut off instantly as the life was crushed out of him. "Run!" Kim shouted, but more creatures were already emerging from side passages and ventilation shafts. They moved with coordinated precision, cutting off escape routes and herding the humans like sheep toward slaughter. Private Suhuli tried to establish a defensive position at a corridor junction, using his training to create overlapping fields of fire with the other surviving Marines. But the creatures seemed to anticipate every tactical decision before it was made. "They know our movements." Lee gasped as another teammate fell to an attack that came from an impossible angle. "Every formation we try, every strategy we use, they counter it before we even finish setting up." Gina watched in horror as the creatures demonstrated perfect knowledge of human military doctrine. When the Marines tried to establish crossfire patterns, the aliens split their attack to neutralize the advantage. When Kim attempted a fighting withdrawal, the creatures were already positioned to cut off the retreat route. It was like watching a chess game where the opponent could see 10 moves ahead. Every human advantage was turned into a trap. Every strength became a weakness that the creatures exploited with ruthless efficiency. "How do they know?" Kim demanded, his voice cracking with desperation as his squad was systematically destroyed round him. "How do they know exactly what we're going to do?" Gina realized the terrible truth. The energy signatures she had discovered weren't just reconnaissance. They had been studying human combat behavior for months. Every patrol, every training exercise, every tactical response had been observed and analyzed. The aliens had built a complete database of human military capabilities and developed perfect countermeasures. The creatures weren't just physically superior. They had turned humanity's own predictability against them. making every learned response a liability rather than an asset. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough for two people, and the metallic walls pressed against Gina's shoulders as she crawled through the darkness. Behind her, Private Suholi dragged himself forward despite the deep gash across his left leg where alien claws had found their mark. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each movement sending fresh drops of blood onto the shaft's floor. "Keep moving, Doc," Lee whispered, his voice strained with pain. "They'll find us if we stop." Gina could hear the creatures moving through the station's corridors below them. Their footsteps had an odd rhythm, part organic padding, part mechanical, clicking that made her skin crawl. Sometimes the sounds would stop completely, and she knew they were listening, analyzing, calculating the most efficient way to corner their prey. They reached a junction where the maintenance shaft opened into a small equipment room. Lee collapsed against a power converter, his face pale from blood loss. Gina quickly activated the room's emergency locks, sealing them in temporarily. "We can't stay here long," she said, examining Lee's wound. The alien claws had cut deep, but somehow missed the major arteries. "They'll detect our heat signatures eventually." Lee managed a weak smile. "Look at you, Doc. Yesterday you couldn't hit a target if it was painted on your face, and now you're talking like a soldier." Gina found a medical kit mounted on the wall and began treating his wound. As she worked, her mind raced through everything she had observed during the attack. The creatures moved with perfect tactical awareness, anticipating every human response with mechanical precision. "They've been watching us," she said suddenly, the pieces clicking together in her head. "All those energy signatures I detected, they weren't just mapping our positions. They were studying how we fight." Lee winced as she applied a pressure bandage. "What do you mean?" "Every training exercise, every patrol pattern, every combat drill, they recorded it all. They built a database of human military behavior and programmed responses to counter everything we do." Gina's hands trembled as the full scope of the invasion plan became clear. That's why Sergeant Kim's team was eliminated so easily. The aliens knew exactly what trained soldiers would do in any situation. A soft scraping sound came from the ventilation shaft above them. The creatures had found their trail. Lee struggled to sit up, raising his rifle toward the ceiling. "At least we can take a few of them with us." But Gina was staring at the weapon in his hands, remembering something important. "Lee, what if being a terrible shot is actually an advantage?" "What are you talking about?" "They studied military training, proper shooting techniques, standard tactical responses. But what if someone doesn't follow those patterns? What if someone shoots completely wrong by every military standard?" The scraping sounds were getting closer. Metallic claws scratched against the shaft's interior as the creatures approached their hiding spot. "You mean like how you shot yesterday?" Lee asked, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly like how I shot yesterday." The ceiling panel above them began to buckle as something heavy pressed against it from the other side. Lee handed Gina his backup sidearm, a compact pulse pistol designed for close-quarters combat. "If your theory is right, Doc, now's the time to test it." The ceiling panel tore open with a shriek of twisted metal. A creature dropped through the opening, its biomechanical form flowing like liquid as it landed. Up close, Gina could see the intricate fusion of organic tissue and advanced technology that made up its body. Fiber optic cables pulsed with information beneath translucent skin, while mechanical joints provided impossible flexibility. Lee fired first, his shots precise and controlled just as military training demanded. The creature twisted away from each bolt with fluid grace, its movements perfectly calculated to avoid the predicted trajectory of properly aimed fire. Then it was Gina's turn. She gripped the pistol all wrong. her stance awkward and unbalanced. Her left foot was too far forward, her shoulders hunched defensively, and she held the weapon with the tentative grip of someone who had never been comfortable with violence. The creature paused, its head tilting with mechanical confusion. Its sensors and tactical computers had no reference point for such improper form. Every combat scenario in its database assumed opponents would follow at least basic shooting principles. Gina closed her eyes, just as she had during the disastrous training session. She didn't aim in any conventional sense instead. She pointed the pistol in the general direction of the creature and pulled the trigger based purely on instinct and terror. The energy bolt flew in a completely unpredictable arc, wobbling through space in a way that defied all ballistic calculations. The creature attempted to dodge, but its evasion pattern was based on predicting properly aimed shots. The erratic bolt struck it in a narrow gap between armor plates, right where the organic and mechanical components interfaced. The creature convulsed, its systems overloading as the energy discharge disrupted the delicate balance between biology and technology. It collapsed, twitching as internal mechanisms failed one by one. Lee stared in amazement. That was impossible. That angle, that trajectory, no computer could have calculated that shot. Gina looked at the smoking pistol in her hands, finally, understanding why her terrible marksmanship might be humanity's greatest weapon against an enemy that had prepared for everything except complete incompetence. Sometimes, she said, the best way to beat a perfect system is to be perfectly unperfectible. The emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as Gina and the injured private Suholi made their way through. The station's collapsing sections, explosions, echoed from multiple levels as the alien creatures systematically destroyed Kepler Station's defensive systems. Through torn hull plates, they could see more alien ships arriving, their sleek forms moving with predatory grace through the void of space. The main railgun, Lee gasped, pointing toward a heavily armored section that had somehow survived the initial assault. If someone could reach the manual targeting system, maybe we could punch through their command ship. Gina stared at the massive weapon installation visible through the station's transparent aluminum viewports. The railgun was designed to fire tungsten projectiles at significant fractions of light speed, powerful enough to crack open battleships. But it required precise manual targeting when the automated systems failed. I can't operate that thing, she protested. I am the worst shot in human space. Remember yesterday? Lee managed a pained smile. Maybe that's exactly why you're the only one who can do this. The path to the railgun turret led through sections of the station that were still under attack. They moved carefully, avoiding the main corridors where creatures hunted in coordinated packs. Gina's unconventional shooting had bought them time, but the aliens were adapting, studying her erratic patterns just as they had studied everything else. They're learning, she whispered as they hid from a passing patrol. It won't work again. Then we better make this count, Lee replied. They reached the railgun control room just as the station's main power grid began failing. Emergency batteries kicked in, providing minimal lighting and life support. The massive weapons targeting computer flickered with error messages as damaged systems struggled to maintain basic functions through the control room's reinforced windows. Gina could see the alien fleet in formation outside. Dozens of ships moved in perfect coordination, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with internal light. At the center of the formation was something larger, a command vessel that looked like a fusion of organic growth and technological precision. That's their brain, Lee said, collapsing into a nearby chair. Take out the command ship, and the rest lose their coordination. The targeting computer was completely offline. Gina would have to aim the entire railgun manually, using nothing but visual estimation and mechanical controls that hadn't been used in decades. The weapon's massive barrel could be adjusted through a series of manual wheels and cranks. But calculating the precise angles required to hit a moving target in three-dimensional space was beyond her. Mathematical abilities? I can't do this, she said, her hands shaking as she approached the manual controls. I don't even know how to calculate the trajectory. Don't calculate, Lee advised, his voice growing weaker from blood loss. Trust your instincts. Do what you did back there, be unpredictable. Outside, the alien command ship had begun moving closer to the station. Its massive form blocked out entire sections of stars as it approached for what was clearly intended to be the final killing blow. Smaller ships positioned themselves round it in a protective formation that would deflect any conventionally aimed shot. Gina gripped the targeting controls, her stance as awkward and uncertain as ever. Military doctrine would have demanded careful calculation, precise measurement, and methodical adjustment of the weapon's alignment. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried to feel where the alien ship would be. The railgun's charging sequence began with a deep harmonic vibration that shook the entire station. Power flowed from the emergency systems into the weapon's magnetic coils, building the tremendous forces needed to accelerate a projectile to relativistic speeds, 30 seconds to full charge. The automated system announced the alien command. Shep continued its approach, its tactical computers no doubt calculating the optimal angle for destroying the station's remaining defenses. Its escorts maintained perfect formation, creating overlapping fields of protection that would stop any shot fired according to standard targeting protocols. Gina adjusted the railgun's aim, not toward where the command ship was, but toward where her intuition told her it might go. Her breathing was irregular, her movements jerky and unpredictable. Every military instructor who had ever lived would have been horrified by her technique. 10-second. As to full charge, the alien ship began to change course, its sensors detecting the railgun's charging sequence. Its evasion pattern was flawless, calculated to avoid any shot fired by trained military personnel using proper targeting. Methods: full charge achieved. Weapon ready to fire. Gina's finger hovered over the firing control. The alien command ship was moving in a graceful arc that would take it safely away from any conventionally predicted impact point. T's escort ships adjusted their positions to maintain protective coverage. She fired. The tungsten projectile erupted from the railgun at nearly 20% the speed of light. It streaked across space in a trajectory that made no tactical sense, following a path that violated every principle of proper gunnery. The alien command ship's evasion computers, programmed with detailed analysis of human military doctrine, calculated that the shot would miss by several thousand kilometers. The massive vessel continued its graceful turn, maintaining course toward what its sensors identified as a safe position. The projectile struck the command ship directly amidships. The impact released energy equivalent to a small nuclear weapon. The alien vessel's biomechanical hull ruptured in a cascade of explosions that spread from the impact point like a deadly flower blooming in space. Secondary explosions followed as the ship's internal systems overloaded and failed. The escort ships immediately began behaving erratically, without the command vessel's coordinating intelligence. Their perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Ships collided with each other, fired at empty space, or simply stopped moving altogether. At that moment, human reinforcement fleets arrived through hyperspace, their guns blazing as they engaged the confused alien forces. The tide of battle turned in minutes as the invaders found themselves fighting without their tactical advantage. Hours later, as rescue teams pulled survivors from the wreckage of Kepler Station, military analysts were already studying the sensor recordings of Gina's impossible shot. The trajectory violated every principle of ballistics they knew. Yet it had achieved what no properly aimed shot could have accomplished. Admiral Young-Ho Park, commanding the rescue fleet, found Gina in the medical bay where she was being treated for minor injuries. Dr. Park, he said formally, "I understand you're responsible for breaking the alien coordination network." Gina looked up from her bandages, still unable to believe what had happened. "I just pointed and shot, sir. I didn't really aim at all." The Admiral smiled. "Sometimes, Doctor, the best way to defeat a perfect enemy is to be perfectly imperfect. Your technique is going to revolutionize how we train our forces in the months that followed." Military academies across human space would study what became known as the Park Method, a shooting technique based on intuition rather than precision, unpredictability rather than training. It turned out that in a universe where enemies could predict and counter every logical action, the most illogical approach was often the most effective. Gina never became comfortable with weapons, but she had learned something important about herself and about humanity. Sometimes the greatest strength came from embracing weaknesses, and sometimes the most powerful shot was the one nobody expected. The end.